the magic happens there. I think we live in a world ruled by logic. But as someone who practices artistry across many different mediums, I really believe that those shower thoughts, those breakthrough moments you have when you're out for a walk and the mind wanders, it's a real thing. I read recently in a book called Your Brain on Art that cognitive neuroscientists estimate that we're only consciously aware of 5% of what's going on in our brains at any time. 95% we're unaware of. There's innate value in that.
Welcome. This is Unfolding, the show where I unfold creative business minds. My name is Marko Pfann, and now I just want you to sit back and enjoy the show. So, welcome back. Today we are talking to Ben Tallon. Ben, I don't even know how to describe him. He's a writer. He's an amazing illustrator. He is a coach. What else do you do, Ben?
I do too many things. That's the short answer. I make myself far more stressed than I need to be sometimes. But yeah, I don't know what I am. 16 years worth of being an illustrator, that's the thing I built my reputation on. I've become increasingly fascinated with the inner workings of creativity. So I write about that. I speak about that on my podcast, The Creative Condition. I do lecturing around that. And a lot of my work has been increasingly going that direction. I need the balance with the artwork too. So yeah, artist, illustrator, too many titles.
Give me a quick wrap up. How did you start out? Did you go to art school? How did you end up in this career now?
Yeah, I've drawn since being a kid, was very thankfully supported by my parents and told to pick a career from the heart because I'd been doing it for a long time, but no pressure. So I thought, okay, let's be a footballer. No, rubbish at football. So stay on at school, get an art qualification. And very luckily, I was given an opportunity to go on work experience to the local art college because I said no to everything else. And I thought, oh, okay. Somebody said, what do you like to do? And it was the first time I'd been asked by a teacher what I actually liked to do. And I said, I draw a lot. He said, okay, let me call the art college and let's see if we can get you in there for a couple of weeks. So I fell in love with the energy in there, that people were doing something they cared about, that they were dressing how they wanted and being these individuals, and was desperate to get back in there. So I studied graphic design, tech level, which is essentially a foundation. Got to try everything. And then I went on to do graphic design and switched to illustration. And that's what my degree is in. And then it was building my way from working in any old job full time to putting a portfolio together and emailing those first clients, and a lot of beg stealing and borrowing going on in those early days.
And now you have an amazing portfolio of illustrations, and you, as I've seen you've worked for some really big magazines around the world even. But what I've noticed is that recently you went way beyond the craft itself, right? You write now. You said you're actually writing nonfiction, or it wasn't fiction. What do you write? Fiction? Both. Oh, amazing. Yeah. So I mean, and that's actually the reason why I wanted to talk to you today, is like, what got you to explore creativity in that sense? What's the why? Why do you do that?
I realised, this is an interesting one, but I realised in I'm 41 now. It took me until maybe 36 or 37 to realise that I've always had a writer's brain. And it's interesting for somebody who chose to draw. But what I realised going even deeper is that storytelling has always been the underpinning element of anything that I truly care about. I'm very passionate about human storytelling and characters. So looking back, I've always been a real empath, a real sponge, emotional sponge. And I think growing up caring about people and being surrounded by rich characters, I was very interested in the human condition. And what was it that enabled my parents to encourage me to choose a career with a heart, whereas others were being very much dissuaded from certain professions? And unconsciously, subconsciously maybe, since being very young, I recognized the magic in creativity. I saw that when people were making or engaged with an art form, or even in conversations when they were connected with something of a shared passion, that there was a certain illumination to the human condition that I just found utterly magic. I saw it in stories in sports. I saw it in film and theatre and books. And yet drawing was this thing I'd always done since being a kid, and followed it into illustration, a career that I love. But the more that I wrote and the more I started to tell my own stories, the more I realised that's the brain that I had. And it's interesting because, again, it's the narrative in each of these art forms that I find great joy in. And with life experience, I guess that I realised that voice, the way I conduct myself, my own, if you want to call it, personal brand, it is there in everything that I do. The way I draw, the way I talk, the way I move, the way I write. And that to me is beautiful. I love that. And I have always observed that in other people. I love seeing that in other people, the way they tell jokes, the way they might be an introvert, I'm just very interested in human beings. And so just through not restricting the trajectory of my career. All the times I've thought I should just be marketing to my illustration clients. Now, I was always off doing something else. I was always writing about that, the fear that I felt when work went quiet. That's how my first book came about. I've always followed that thread quite impassionately, sometimes maybe to my own financial detriment. It's never led me astray. Not really. I think that doors open. People come into my field. It seems to just keep happening. There's a serendipity there that I'm addicted to, and I can't leave that alone.
So you are currently writing a book with a mutual friend of ours. And I've read some passages, and it's freaking amazing. You have a very unique style, like a very colorful, a very illustrative kind of style of writing. Like you have the picture in mind when I read your stuff. And what I want to ask you, how do you develop a style like this? A style, a very unique style, a very rich style of writing?
I think that it comes from a combination of things. At the very top of that list, I would put inner authority. And by inner authority, I don't mean any form of arrogance. I just mean complete peace with who I am, what I'm not. I grew up in a working class mill town, which is very rough around the edges, but full of characters, full of warmth as well, even though people don't always see that, particularly in these recent fearful times. And because I was always observing these characters, and I loved the colloquialisms and the way that people spoke and the unique language they would use. And I loved this wherever I went and wherever I got to go through my work and my creativity. And I always trusted in that. And the other aspect of this is being exposed to culture where people are also doing that. The work of Chuck Palahniuk is a major influence, the author of Fight Club and Joke and other novels. And he's written a brilliant book called Consider This about writing. To get insights like that and see the way people write in an imperfect but mesmeric style, just like the way that a singer will sing in a way that somebody thinks is rubbish or imperfect or not traditionally succinct, but actually makes their audience fall in love with them. I always saw great magic in that, and I trusted it. And then I guess the other thing is always having good mentors. I've been blessed with working with good art directors who constantly knock the perfectionism out of me and stop me from overworking my artwork. And I saw similarities between that rough, unfinished style, the way that I draw and the way that I write. And I think because I came to writing relatively late in my life, at least compared to maybe people who've studied writing, I came at it with nothing to lose. And truly, I wasn't looking to gain a great deal from it either, other than expressing myself. So really, yeah, I think it's just complete trust. And I've got illustration to thank for that, and good art directors, because what they showed me in a different medium gave me great trust when I came to a new art form. Yeah.
I like this. Like in times where everything is like polished, and with AI and ChatGPT and the writing is like perfect, having a unique, polished, unfinished, a rough writing style, actually that makes a lot of sense. And that's actually, when you describe it now, that's what I think I've seen in your work and the passages that I've read from the book. So what is it about writing that, to me, writing is almost like a therapy, right? It helps me get my thoughts out. It also helps me clarify specific things, but it also helps me to actually tap into ideas and sometimes solutions that I didn't know I have. So here's a quick question. What is the magic about writing?
I think it's so immediate, and it can be so visceral, so personal. It can be so layered. It can be anything you want. And you could say that of any art form, but there's something about, there's a direct process that happens between the brain and the page that I think is just so immediate and quite essential, actually. I've been recommending this in my pilot coaching sessions recently to people who have some kind of barrier, some kind of fear about their creativity. I always suggest going back to a journal process, because there's something about the immediacy of those thoughts and allowing them to be on the page and doing it not for anyone else but for you. It's so beautiful, and things emerge from the unconscious, I believe, when you write that way, that give you clues about yourself. You're getting into the depths of your mind that you can't consciously access. I really believe that. And you hit on something important there about the catharsis in this. This has been really important for me. There's a reason I've got a fiction series called Stories for the Apocalypse, and it's because of, we're here again today on the day we're recording. It's a reflection of 2016 all over again. Obviously, I'm referring to the US election. And that kind of sense of dread in the world and that horrible foreboding was something that I absolutely had to get out because, like I said, I'm a complete empath and I have to be careful with how much I think about things, especially when I spend a lot of time alone in my work. So in my fiction in particular, there's very much a degree of exposing those thoughts, getting them out there and letting them breathe. But lo and behold, as with the creative process, they take on a life of their own. And they often become something that you didn't intend, or there are beautiful surprises when you get them down on the page, and then you get to mold them and shape them. And there's just something, I don't know what the word is. There's just something, I keep going back to immediate, but I just think there is something so raw and immediate about writing, because everyone's got those thoughts, everyone's got that lived experience, and it's a very rudimentary but almost a gateway medium.
Okay. So when you tell me a little bit about this writing process, and I think especially it's journaling, I think it is important for people to do, and I think a lot of people should be doing. What's the benefit of actually journaling your thoughts out? Like if you would go deeper into this, I want to explore this a little bit. What's the benefit here? Why should people write? Why should people journal?
Because I think that we spend so much time caught up in our heads, worrying about the future, looking back on the past, and there are so many distractions in today's world that I often think we don't even have the time to stop and spend time deep thinking and accessing that part of our mind from where the really great creativity comes. And when I speak of creativity, I'm not just talking about artistic expression. I'm talking about also direction in your life and seeing the wood for the trees. So I think that when you make a conscious effort to put things down on paper and allow these thoughts to come, it directs you inwards almost. I think it gives you the focus and the switch off from all of the noise of the modern world. And things then come out. If you do that in a way that it might be on a computer, it might be on a page, that's an individual decision and preference. But I just think that there's something about just letting these thoughts flow, letting them all come out and not restricting that process is surprising. I find it myself, if I sit there and write in a very personal way, it really takes on a life of its own, to the point, and I've heard this said by many writers, where it feels like it's not even me writing. It's just coming so naturally and with such flow that it's weird. Especially in the fiction, I found that these characters just became something I hadn't envisioned. They literally took on lives of their own and began behaving in ways that I could never have preconceived. And in the non-fiction, it's the same thing. I remember looking back at the first draft of The Creative Condition and thinking, did I really write that? This feels like someone else wrote it. I must have been so in the zone that this was a really unconscious process. And I just think we're so bombarded in today's world that we don't often get beyond the conscious. And that conscious is not even right now in this moment. That's this, we all know it, the scatterbrained, stretched feeling that we often have come the evenings, because we've just had so much to process in the day that we're exhausted. And I think that writing is a real way past that.
So you said people who won't get beyond their conscious. Why would they want to get beyond their conscious? Why would they want to tap into the subconscious?
That's a good question. I think because I think the magic happens there. I think we live in a world ruled by logic. This society, we push, particularly now with datafication and all the technology we have, which is magic if you can master that technology. Look at what we're doing today, recording remotely. It's overseas. That's wonderful that we're able to share messages this way. But I really think that as someone who practices artistry across many different mediums, I really believe that those shower thoughts, those breakthrough moments you have when you're out for a walk and the mind wanders, it's a real thing. And when you study the unconscious, there's so much that we don't know about that is the best guidance we can have. Another way to put that, probably a better way to put that, I read recently in a book called Your Brain on Art by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross, that cognitive neuroscientists estimate that we're only consciously aware of 5% of what's going on in our brains at any time.
Oh.
So if 95% we're unaware of, there's innate value in that. So there's moments that we've all had when a solution just comes to you. It's not just genius coming out of thin air. It's in there, and it needs space and time to marinate and to process and to deliver you solutions for direction in your life.
So it's more like contemplating is also this writing process also helps to get out those ideas, thoughts, this innate intelligence that's already inside of you, helps you to get that out. And is that also what creativity is all about? Like getting into the zone and then tapping into those untapped resources?
I believe so. I think there's The famous way to put it is joining dots. And I think it's true. It's seeing patterns in things, and the further apart those dots may be sometimes, that can be the sharpest form of creativity. But of course, creativity comes in many different shapes and sizes. But I think if we're talking about it as ideas that have value, that could be intellectual creativity, working on client projects, or it might be emotional creativity. Let's say an artist at a canvas who just wants to say something about the world and their lived experience. Either format, I think the unconscious can play an incredibly important role there. And certainly in terms of your life and career direction, I think that we often know where we want to go, but how do we even start to tune into that and trust those instinctive feelings? Because of logic, again, tells us otherwise, because we can't put it in a spreadsheet. But when you start to write unconsciously in that way, it's quite amazing, that process, and what it reveals about the way we're thinking and how we see the world. And it almost pulls us outside of our own head so that we can have a conversation with that part of ourselves.
Does it become real if you write something down, some thoughts from in your head which are actually untangible, like it's not tangible, right? And then you write it down. Is it real then? Is that what's happening? Is because you can see it now, you can touch it, you can feel it. Now it's a real idea. What is this about writing?
I think the possibilities are quite endless, but the example I mentioned recently, this was to help a friend who had left university, got a job quite quickly, has been in that job for almost a decade, is now in a position of leaving that job, and was quite terrified returning to the job market, having only ever really applied for one job in her field. And she was so disconnected from her emotional creativity, having not practiced this for all those years, or only fleetingly. She'd done it here and there, but really wasn't feeling it in the same way. So my suggestion was to begin writing. And the reason I suggested this to her in particular is because she had a wonderful sense of humor, a very kind of ironic, quite sarcastic, but in a very warm way. And I felt that she lost this in the language she was using in her CV and her portfolio. And I wanted her to get back to a point of fearlessness where she would embrace that again. But I knew that this wouldn't happen through the design process because she'd become quite conditioned by the job. That wasn't entirely negative, it was just different. My suggestion was to start writing and to start making those observations that she'd become fearful of putting into her design in a different medium, because I knew that the immediacy and the kind of disposable nature of just writing something down on paper for only yourself, it would remove the fear of posting it online or sharing it with a friend or sharing it with anybody at all. My thinking there was that she would tap into her purest self and start to see her value more. There might be things there that made her laugh, and she might, in seeing them in a less intimidating form on the page, my thinking was that there would be little bits that would jump out and resonate more than others and give her clues as to what actually has value about herself and the way she thinks, the way she uses her humor. So I don't quite have the terminology to describe exactly what that is, but I think that in that imperfect process, there was more freedom to be very real and very honest and very pure.
You ask her to just write for herself, right? Not to post it, it's just not to show it to anyone, just to get thoughts out and just what she was thinking. And by that, she was able to understand herself better, what she wanted, what was the outcome here?
Well, there were no conditions on that. It was, like I said, my thinking was that she would see her humor on the page, and because this was journaling, so this was I wanted to hear her voice, but I saw the fear in the finished format. Her fear was a combination. It was, I don't feel as comfortable as I once did in sharing this, so I said, don't share it, do it for you. And then it was a kind of stylistic thing, and I said, there's no need to trap. What we're looking at here is you as a personality. I wanted to get her back to seeing what I saw, which was a very funny, very honest, very likable, magnetic person. I wanted her to see that, so I wanted her to start writing things down, just thoughts, observations, things that she found funny, jokes, sarcastic responses to things going on in the world. There were really no conditions. It was just make some time to sit down and write down your feelings, your thoughts. And then my hope was that she would think that certain aspects of that would jump off the page and would start to present themselves as things that had more value. And then it would hopefully create a less intimidating process in terms of design. So maybe then she would start to consider, okay, perhaps we could give that a typographic treatment and see how that line works as an illustration, for example. It was working backwards to strip away some of the trappings of the medium.
That's quite remarkable, because it's like we are all conditioned, right? And then we have layers of conditioning, and actually getting to your true self and like your authentic voice requires to shed away all those layers. And this usually is like, if you talk coaching, this can be therapy, it would be years. Coaching, it would be months. And it seems like writing is really, might actually be a shortcut to actually get down to your feelings and who you are as a person. So is that something you experience yourself? Like that your
Yeah.
true self comes out when you write? So how do you do that? Tell me, like, I don't know, like, how would you tell me, how would you coach me if I want to find my authentic voice?
I like to explore the personality. I like to explore the flaws of people. And there's an exercise that I wrote about in the Creative Condition. I don't know if you're aware of the game Top Trumps. It's a card game. It's a very simple interface. There's many versions, Star Wars, football, whatever version, there's a version in Top Trumps.
I got
And it's a ranking system. So you score out of 10 on different traits. So I remember having a kind of magic and mystery version as a kid. So there would be a fairy. And for example, the fairy would rank for maybe 9 for nimbleness or dexterity, and whereas an ogre would rank 9 or 10 for strength, and so on. So I found this quite a fun, simple exercise to start to write down personality traits about yourself and to ask those around you who know you to maybe rank you, if you're feeling brave, to rank you on certain traits. And the whole idea was that you would consider the flip side of each of these traits, because my example that I always say is that I'm quite clumsy. I'm very haphazard, always knocking things over in the house. In the house, it's a nightmare. It's definitely a 1 or a 2 out of 10. But that is also the genesis of my art style and the way I write. The same rawness, the same unrefined qualities. When you put it in that context and you flip it, that becomes an 8 or a 9. So then, and also when I look at my work ethic and my drive, when I'm passionate and I'm motivated about something and that is high, I'm a real worker. Again, the downside of that, if you want to flip that one the other way, is that I can be a bit of a bull in a china shop and I can overwork myself. I can take on too many things and end up completely burned out. So it's a duality exercise, but it's quite fun because there's no limit to things that you can look at. So I encourage people to start to play with that and to create a little bit of a mapping of themselves and to be very honest and start to look at that. And it's interesting how you look at that each way. So that's something I encourage people to do. And I'm very conversational. So I like to talk to people about the things they're into, the things they're doing, because there's always this classic disconnect of the things you do for pleasure in your own time and the things you do for a job. It goes back to the logic thing. We live in a world where people have to justify their decisions in fiscal terms or in career or success terms. So I think that people make decisions based on that and find ways to justify that it's right for them as a person. And I think a lot of these decisions happen early in our lives when we haven't lived enough life to truly know ourselves. So it's interesting when you do that with people who are maybe around my age, over 40 or even older. It's quite interesting how people have either hidden a certain characteristic away or they're ashamed of a certain way of being. And I'll find the humor and the storytelling in it. And I'll love that about a person. And at first, I find that people can be quite thrown by my enjoyment in a certain thing that they're maybe a little ashamed about. But the more I have that conversation with them, I find myself flipping their perception of it quite quickly. And this is not coaching. This is just me as a human having conversations with people. And I've always done that. And I've always pushed people to embrace those bits. Call it the shadow self, call it the dark side, whatever you want to term that as. We all have it. And I think there's a lot of magic in that, particularly where creativity is concerned.
So you have a gift of pointing out the weirdness in people, so to speak?
Yeah, I love that. I love weirdness.
Actually, that's when I think about reading your stuff, that there is something about that. Tell me about the Creative Condition. Why did you write it?
It's an interesting one. I started to write the Creative Condition in 2017, and it's the only time I can remember where my confidence completely bottomed out in a moment. So I was writing on a train back from Manchester, and the manuscript was up to about 50,000 words. And I literally closed my laptop lid. My confidence completely fell away in an instant. Horrible feeling. Closed my laptop, and I couldn't go back to the thing for 5 years.
What?
And when it came back, I'm not joking, it burst out. I remember it very well. It was at Christmas time. I was washing up. This goes back to what we were saying about the unconscious. So I'm quite rigid about taking a good 2 weeks at Christmas to really just let myself be as a human and not work. And in that moment, washing up, the thing burst out in a finished form in my mind. It's the only way I can describe it. And when I sat down to write that thing in January, I didn't stop for 2 years, nearly 2.5 years in the end. And the thing just flowed. And the people that came into my life, it was quite remarkable. So I had to follow that thread, even though many times I felt guilty for doing it because there was no upfront money. There was no guarantee I would make any money or it would be even a decent book. The reason I chose to write that is for all the things we talked about. I had been talking to many people through the podcast and in my life about creativity and about individuality and humor and all those things that we just touched upon. And I didn't know what the book needed to be. And I had the very early semblance of it when I started writing in 2017. I knew I wanted to create a biography of creativity of some form. And I knew it had to be raw and rugged the way that I do things. I knew it had to have humor in there. I knew it had to use these interviews in some way and these observations I've been making all my life. But what I realized when it did come back was that I just hadn't lived enough life to write the book that it needed to be. And when it came, I'd had a few personal, I don't want to say traumas, it wasn't traumas, a few lows. I'd gone through periods of self-introspection and overthinking. And I guess it was just a critical mass of all of these things and my love of creativity. And I can't describe it any better than it just launched out of my subconscious, unconscious, whatever, whichever. And it was just there and ready. And when I wrote the thing, it just came to life. And
So I love that what you said. Like you haven't lived enough life yet to write. And I wrote a book like when I taught my students 10 years ago. I thought like I knew everything, and I started to write a book. And during the process, I realized I know nothing, like literally nothing. And I still finished the book, but I never published it. And I still have it. But it's what you described. Is I haven't lived enough life. I didn't know enough to actually write about those subjects. But what I want to point out, what you just said, I'm not sure if I heard you correctly, but you said you were guilty writing the book. You felt guilty. Why?
Because he wasn't paying me up front, and I was an illustrator, and I needed to make money because by this point I had 2 young twins and a mortgage, so there was a little more external pressure in my lifestyle there. But I also understood that well enough to hold it at bay and to trust, and that was very hard at times. And it still is with the coaching stuff that I'm trying to start now. I still get that guilt, but I know that's not on me, and I trust what's in there more than what's out there.
But that's something a lot. That's what I think. What's wrong in this world today is we all feel this pressure with the economy, with the depression, now with the election, we all thing that happened. There's pressure from the outside. What people do when they get pressure, they get into this short-term thinking mode, and they only do what they only want to, like they want to have those quick gains. I want to have money now. I want to have this now. I want to have my love life now. And what you described is actually breaking through this urge that immediately comes up, right? We all feel that pressure. If you spend 2.5 years writing a book, for me, even if I spend one day not being productive, I feel that pressure. And I have to hold myself back, right? But that's so beautiful what you described, just that you have to break through this, right? And you have to trust yourself. What is that? Tell me about this trust. Like, how do you manage to not fall back into this short-term, actionable, whatever modes? How do you follow your dreams?
Above all else, I see great magic in creativity, and if I'm not feeling that, I find it incredibly hard to apply myself. I revert back to my 14-year-old self, kicking the back of the chair of the person in front of me in school and drawing football shirts in my exercise book when I should have been doing maths. And now, having studied creativity and having spent a lot of time reading people like Sir Ken Robinson and psychologists and neuroscientists, I now understand the many forms of intelligence, and I understand now I never needed to feel stupid at school. But a 14-year-old doesn't understand the curriculum and the structure of it all and know that's the problem. You just trust in the authority and the system that's there, and I think that stays with us. But I've become quite resolute in it, and it's funny because there are days when I think, oh my God, am I going to leave myself in a position where I have to sell the house here and we have to move somewhere we don't want to live with the kids and all that. But then the next day, I'll feel amazing again, and I'll check that thought process and get back to following. And I mentioned it there about the book, but I live in Salisbury now, and we moved here with the young twins because we needed a little bit more support. And we both liked Salisbury, and it's close to where Laura's family's from, my wife. And from the moment I did, when I started writing that book, it's incredible the amount of local people that I met from who helped me to make connections or were direct connections that I interviewed for the book, and then helped me with the Kickstarter. So I funded the book through Kickstarter, and the guy on the next street founded a publisher who has a crowdfunding model. And we went for coffee. He gave me all these insights and tips and tricks and everything else. So then he puts me in touch with somebody else who was able to give me an illustration commission at a time when I really needed it. That person has just come back to give me another job when I really needed it for the same reasons, because I keep stubbornly following this feeling and this serendipity that keeps happening. But there were just too many instances of this happening to not trust it. It's as simple as that. It's when all these uncanny connections happen and these people keep coming forward in my life, how can you not follow that? Someone like me who's empathetic and loves creativity this much, I have to at least find out. It's very hard to articulate because it's so instinctive, and I genuinely think that it transcends language. I think it's what we're tuned into as humans that's bigger than us.
But for you, people become signposts, right? It's a signal and noise, right? This what comes through, and you when you trust things happen, things you couldn't have planned, when you trust the way, or when you actually trust your gut and do the things, and it oftentimes goes against everything you have been taught at school, goes against everything you have been conditioned in a certain way. And it's not like we are conditioned to make small incremental gains and not have this compounding effect and make nothing and then have this, well, maybe big payday or maybe not, but at least following your passion, right? Mm-hmm. So what's next for you?
It's funny because one of the friends who I featured in the book, a guy called Shane Gall, one of my closest friends, who's one of my best men, he was 2 years below me at school, and he's a great web developer now, and he was very mischievous at school for the same reasons I just explained. Would get in trouble all the time at school, but he was a whiz in IT, and we've always helped one another. We've always, for want of a better term, we've coached each other in our lives as being close friends. We've been each other's biggest champions. And when I told Shane about my thinking about going into coaching, which is the answer to your question, I've got this burning passion to help people understand creativity. He was so animated and so excited. And he said, look, until this moment, I didn't even know that was a job, but you are the man to do that job. I cannot think of anyone better. That's what we've been doing for each other all this time. And that meant the world to me, and that felt amazing. And that came at a time when I was a week where I was struggling to trust that feeling that we just talked about. But his words and him saying that and knowing that has always been there in me since a very young age, and it's so authentic. It's just who I am as a human being. That gave me the tenacity I needed that week to just fight through that momentary lull and to go, oh my God, I've got another shot at doing something that I am incredibly well suited to doing, just because of who I am and the way I've been born and the world I live in, just like I felt being an illustrator. And when I get that feeling, I just have to make it work, even if all logic says they can. I have to fight those odds. So that's where you find me now, and I'm going to launch the Creative Condition website soon, which means I'm finally going to have a home for all of this exploration of creativity and the human condition that I've been conducting for the last 10 years. It's incredibly exciting. It's also terrifying. It's a new thing. I don't have the same track record of success that I have as an illustrator. Therefore, I get that imposter syndrome and that intimidation that many of us feel. I also know that I can break through that, and I know that I'm good at this, and I know that I bring value to people's lives. So I just have to get out there and find out how, trust that serendipity, trust what I don't know, that it will happen again. So that's where you find me.
What I love about you, because I see a few patterns, but what I don't see is you overthinking. It's like it seems like when you have an idea, you trust your feeling, you don't go into your mind. But what people usually do is they think about it. And when they think about it, they find more reasons not to do something than the reasons to do something. And it almost seems like you planned it out and you just go all into your feeling and just follow it from there. Is that kind of?
Kind of. Yeah, do you know, when you said that, I thought of my illustration process and the fear of the blank page, classic thing. But what I always find when I get a new project, oftentimes before I've even drawn a line, I will throw some paint at the page. I'll just throw something down. And I do this until I find a mark that resonates, just a stroke of paint, something that feels good. And when I've got that, the momentum begins. It's a very organic process, and then I can start to draw over that, start to work with that. I have something to build upon. And that goes way beyond my art process. It's the same with my writing. I'll write a sentence. When I write a sentence that feels good, everything starts turning, it moves, and I trust that process. But yeah, I know I don't. In that regard, I really don't overthink. I couldn't be any from overthink.
You don't start with a strategy for writing the next 10 pages or the chapter, whatever, but you write something and then you wait for something that resonates and off you go.
I get stuck in there and feel the resonance of it. I always have. And that, again, that's not right or wrong. That's me. That's just the way I do things. It's the way it comes naturally. It's where I get the most joy.
But it's something like, this is actually something that to me is makes a lot of sense, because this is art. This is how you do creativity. But then what I teach in art school these days, and I know this because I'm teaching at art school, but I see what other people teach. They teach tools. They teach software. They teach processes. They don't teach you this, what you just said. Find the spark, find your passion, find what resonates, and find an interesting perspective or something. I just explore. It almost seems art is not about exploration anymore, but it's more about processes. What do you say to that?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the good tutors recognize that. But I think they're having a hard battle against technology to get. And I've seen it because I talk at universities quite often. I do guest lectures. And I always see, I went to one the other week and they had beautiful, all the printing presses and all the original kit and screen printing, and it was staffed and it was there for them. And oh my God, when I walked in that room, I wanted to just get playing and get stuck in there and give up on my talk and go and do that. But the thing is, they struggle to get them in there without good reason. It's the default thing is to just hunch over that laptop and to start on a screen. And it's, wow, no, go and make a mess on that printer and see what happens. And you can always come back to that machine and make it work for you as long as it serves the creativity. But I do think it's very difficult for many reasons for people, particularly young people, when they, like we said, they don't have the life experience. But I always had this fearlessness. I think this was something that was quite natural for me. So I couldn't really tell you why. I don't know. I think it's just the way my brain works. I don't know. But I'd love to just get started somewhere. I wrote 2 fiction books in early parenthood. And that's crazy. I was one of the upsides of freelancing is that I was able to take up about 8-10 weeks. I can't remember exactly what. And it was right at the start of COVID too. So I took 8 to 10 weeks off, and I knew myself well enough to know that I needed to retain just a tiny bit of that emotional creativity to stay happy. It's just, that's who I am. That's what I do. Yeah. But I also wanted to be a great dad. I didn't want to be working during this precious time. So what I found myself doing is when the babies had fallen asleep in the evening and we were both tired, I would use my phone, the Notes app, to start writing these little stories. And they were very personal. It was reflective stories about just the world around me. And this ended up becoming a book called Your Mum, as in your mother, as in the insult. And it was a series of 21 flash fiction stories, and each of them responded to a commonly found item on the British streets, anything from a beer can to a single shoe that was left there. And this was just purely emotional creativity for me. And because I didn't have the time to overthink it, these were very raw, tiny little snappy stories. And I love that book so much now. I look back on that and I don't know if I could have ever done that if I'd sat down to consider and think about what the book needed to be. It was just very raw and emotional, and it just came there and then, unplanned. And I just refined it as it went. And then when I found a bit more energy at the end of it, I shaped the thing and I had a book on my hands, and that wasn't the plan. It was just what happened. But I do take great joy in just seeing what manifests from these processes and these feelings, and I struggle to articulate it more than that.
But I love it because it seems like you totally blend out the whole thinking, strategizing, planning thing that most people actually get stuck in. And now you're coaching, you will see that people are stuck in the overthinking. They're in this, I call this free state, because they think so much, they can't decide to take action either way. And I think this is so beautiful about what you just described. It makes sense now that you shift careers, you create so many things. Why? Because you don't lose time by actually overthinking stuff. You just get into, if it feels good, if it resonates, you keep doing and go on. And it's like what you said with the drawings, with the illustrations. That's actually how I picture your life now. Right? Like you find something that resonates, and you go and you do it. And that almost sounds like perfect creative freedom. This is what everyone wants, right? Just follow the passion and trust that the resources, the connections, the money that you need will come. But that takes a lot of trust. where does this trust come from? Are you like, does that come from your parents? Have you been taught to trust yourself? And that's something special. It's pure and special.
I really don't know. I don't know where that. Maybe it's. I think the wonderful thing about getting started as an illustrator, as a freelance illustrator, is that it was very pure about the work I put out into the world. My portfolio, even though anybody else, some of my early jobs could be relatively dull but paid. I never showed them. I had even at the very beginning, I had enough faith to not show that work and to only lead with my portfolio as a statement of intent. I was quite scared of creating a career for myself where I didn't like the work. So I led with a certain degree of trust there. Parents, yes, but only in as much as my parents they wouldn't have cared if I'd worked in a supermarket as long as I was happy. That's all that mattered to them. And that was amazing because I never felt pressure to do anything, but I followed it wholeheartedly. But then it just goes back to the inner authority thing again, too, and knowing yourself well enough to know what you need to be happy. And I've just always placed a massive value on my happiness. And that sounds obvious, but so many people don't. They lead with,
No. It's like
with all the other.
And I get into this sometimes too. It's like the last, like I myself, I'm the last thing I care about, the last thing on the to-do list. Everything else comes first. And I think in times like these, and it's actually hard to care for yourself and actually trust your intuition. And what you're doing is like doing what you really want to do, what you love to do. And I think it's beautiful. And I think and I'm not there yet, to be honest. I would love to have more of that, of what you are doing, what you're having. So how do you help people? How can you help people to get there?
I think I can help them to find that same inner authority and to see the value in them, in who they are naturally, the things they love, the value in the places they've been and the experiences they've had, and just to understand why that's important too. Because once you start to trust in all that stuff, it forms those natural processes that you mentioned. And yeah, mine might come through drawing and writing and whatever else, but everybody else will have theirs also. And I have great appreciation for the way that everyone. It's not like I'm best positioned to just help those people who are like me. I get a great kick out of helping people who are completely different. I have a friend, she springs to mind, Laura Boast, who's a great designer here in the UK, and we shared a studio for a while. And she's so precise and so neat and so clinical in her design, but her love of that and her meticulous nature is infectious too. So working with someone like Laura would be amazing. I'd love to get into that and understand what makes her tick and see the differences. And that's where the kind of dot joining thing comes in too, because I think having observed so much throughout my life, I'm not the most. So I didn't grow up with a lot of cultural horizons. I grew up before the internet. I liked what I liked. I played a lot of football. I watched wrestling. I drew, and I liked Blur, the band. Beyond that, my cultural horizons weren't great. But what I now understand, a little older and wiser, is that I was always watching people in the best possible way. I was always appreciating characters and understanding their humor and seeing differences in people and celebrating that in my own little way. I never wanted to be like those other people. But seeing them be like they were made me want to find who I was. And that's why, therefore, I think I'm well positioned to help people to understand the way they are and the value in that and how to take that forward with confidence.
I truly believe like knowing who you are and having this feeling that you actually know who you are. I think I believe is a big source, a huge source of trust in the universe, in yourself, in your capabilities. And also, even though if you, as you said, like you wrote a book for 2.5 years, and you should have made more money, or you should have made money because you had a young family. It's like to other people that they might actually sound insane. If you have, what happens to most people when they have kids, when they get kids, is like they can get into this hyper mode, like this, where they want to work more, where they want to get more money, they want to take care of the kids and the family and all those things. And I love that you actually, for some reason, your mind just works the direct opposite. And that is a beautiful thing. It's beautiful to understand and to see that there is a different way of doing things, a way that actually seems to be much more enjoyable than just doing what you're told to do, doing what we think we need to do. Also, we might not want to do it. And that there are actually, sorry for this long ramble, but I'm just thinking now. But it's almost like, I think that might be the energy why I want to talk to you, is like you show that there's different way of doing things, and that people could actually alive and creativity much more than they do.
Yeah. Even within this kind of hyper-capitalist world we're in, there are ways to do that. I commented the other day, I'm friends with Radim Malinic. I don't know if you're aware of his work. He's also an author, designer. He's also something of a polymath and has that same kind of insatiable energy that I seem to have. So I commented saying this to Radim. I said, I haven't met many people that have more restlessness than me, but you were one of them. And he replied to me and he said, what a wonderful time to be alive, that we can do what we want and make a living from it, as in the technology we have and all the tools. And I think that's really magic. And yeah, I do think it's sad that people get funneled down these certain paths because of the fear and end up lost. I think it's a great shame. I do understand it also, because I certainly have my days. The other morning, I remember dropping the kids off at school, and the first thought that burst in my head as I walked out the school gates was, oh, you're nearly a week into November and you've only made X amount this month. And I shut it down quite quick, because I recognized this. I think it was first of all, what's this month metric? Because yeah, okay, in the longer term picture, you have to look at this stuff. But it was like, no, don't start getting hung up on this 1 week into the month. And I shut it down. And what I did was I put myself on a thought process of how many of the biggest, most enjoyable, best paying projects you've had were predictable. None of them was the answer. None of them.
That's a great insight. Right?
Yeah, none of them. If I was to go back to my mindset before each of those jobs, or the nearest freak out, it would have been the same. It always was this way. I've carved all of this out of nothing, essentially. I've got the degree, but that degree didn't guarantee me anything. I realized that all my graphic design friends could walk into jobs. There was no market for me. I had to make it.
But that's so true, right? It's like moments in life, the great projects, like meeting the great people, it's unpredictable. Like me, like I'm doing a new festival now with Hector, and a year ago, I didn't even know Hector. 8 months ago, I didn't know Hector. I went on stage and off because I was lost. So I did something, and like the crazy journey I'm on just unfolded. And it's every day I wake up, it's like wondering how that happened. And I actually enjoy it. It's amazing. It gives a lot of new energy. And that's what I've just realized when you talked about your journey, what you do and things like that. And I think there's magic in this unpredictability. And maybe we have to foster this unpredictability. Like we have to actually encourage that. We have to get that out and put ourselves into a situation where magic can happen. Something can happen. And if you're in a job and if you're doing the same thing over and over again, it won't.
It's absolutely right. And speaking of, Hector's a beacon for that. He's the epitome of that. There's a magic about Hector that since I was introduced to him, and again, this is interesting, but I had a real financial panic going back about 2 years. It's funny that I've been having these on and off for about 2 years now. There's a pattern here, but I know Simon Dixon, one half of Dixon Baxi, through the podcast. I interviewed Simon. I've interviewed him and Apollo twice. Love chatting to those guys. Simon has been very supportive. And when I went to interview them the second time, I mentioned that I was at these crossroads, that I was thinking about trying to move myself more into this creativity space, but I didn't yet know what that looked like. And I guess unconsciously I was seeking some wisdom from Simon, being more experienced than I. And Simon said, let me introduce you to some people. There's a few people I think you'd have a good connection with. The first one he introduced me to an hour later as I was on the train was Hector. Within 5 minutes, Hector had booked me to speak at Off Festival 2023. And this kick-started an incredible sequence of events that were just entirely unpredictable. So off the back of that, I met somebody at Off, and then through them, I was introduced to Stefan Sagmeister, got him on my podcast, and ended up interviewing Stefan live at the following year's Off Festival. And through that first Stefan interview, landed on the radar of a lady called Olya Protasova, who is a Ukrainian designer and illustrator and design activist. And she was able to talk to some other people in Ukraine about Stefan's new book. Stefan's book got translated into Ukrainian. And this thing is still moving. This sequence is still going. And it's just pure magic to me. And Hector has been there every step of the way and keeps coming back in at various points. And as you mentioned, we've got this thing going on now, this project, and it's just, yeah, I love it. And I get such joy from it. And thankfully, I love it on more days than I question it.
That's a good point. Yeah. Beautiful. I really see like the same thing happened to me when I met Hector. And I think he has this magic. He has just a huge trust into the universe and everything. But it's so true, right? It's just putting yourself out there, just trying things. will lead to something else. And you might not know yet if this will bring in something. Like you interviewing Stefan Sackmeister, so that's a big thing already. But you could have never predicted that this would lead to the next step, and where even like starting your podcast with Simon, same thing, right? Leading that leads to Hector. That's something you could have never predicted to happen, right? Beautiful.
Yeah, and the best way you can push that in your favor is by being your purest self. And I know that's a massive cliche these days, but it means it's a lot deeper than people give it credit for. It's not just a moniker you can say and post on social media. That it takes, like you said, hell of a lot of life experience, hell of a lot of fear, hell of a lot of trust, knowing yourself. There's so much to that. And I guess in a nutshell, that's what I want to help people to do.
And when I talk to my clients, or I'm coaching clients, when I talk to them, the first thing is always, and you talked about this before as well, it's making them aware of the unique experiences and the depth and the wealth of experience they have and how this is different to anyone else, because we don't see that. We think we do the same thing like everyone else and there's nothing special, but it's in the nuances. The journey is different. Like your perspective is different, and people underestimate how valuable this sharing your journey is to how valuable this is to other people, because other people, again, only see their own journey. They don't know. Everyone wants some guidance. Everyone wants something to hold on, right? Everyone wants to see that they're not alone out there. And I think sharing yourself, sharing your journey is what the creative industry needs more of, getting close together. Ben, I don't want to overstress your time. You have kids and it's late now, but one more question, if I may.
Of course.
What's the future of the creative industry in times of AI? Where are we heading?
I have no idea. As much as the next person, I have no idea. I do have faith in human creativity. I do think that it's going to be quite revolutionary. It's hard to ignore that. I think it's going to shake a lot of things up. I don't know to what end at this point, because I think that ultimately people need to interact, and you just can't replicate human consciousness and empathy and all of those beautiful things. So in terms of the meaningful work and the work that cuts through, I think AI will assimilate into a supporting role for sure. What that means in economic terms, I have no idea. I think there's probably going to be a lot of change there for sure.
What it also means is like actually, well, your competitive edge could actually be getting connected with your inner self, like getting closer to your authentic self. That could actually be what separates you from AI.
I think it's more. I think it's going to be more important than ever. Yeah, I spoke to, and just within the context of illustration, I spoke to a friend who's been in the game a little longer than me, and he felt that the stuff that is replicable will be replicated. That's the way he saw it. But the stuff that's got real personality and real story and real value will have its value heightened. That's not to say that it's not going to create a real scrap for the work that is there as we work out what the way forward is. But there's certainly opportunity, and that voice, that authenticity is going to be a major factor in that. There's no getting around it, because the machine stuff is what it is. It's pulling from work that already exists. So if you want new and you want interesting and you want positive change, then that can only come from people ultimately.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. And
my pleasure.
Have a great evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in. My name is Marko Pfann, and hope to see you all again on our next show, where we unfold creative business minds.